Hi, fifth graders. Welcome back to our fictional narrative writing project. Today we are on session 5 and we will be working on our resolution and our ending today. We will be writing both of those because they do go hand in hand. So let's look at our resolution first. Now, we are currently on the decline of our story. We have already written the introduction, the build-up or the rising action, our peak main event, and now we're working back down on the resolution before we get to the ending. So problems need to be solved in stories. In books, in movies, in shows, problems need to be solved so that the reader or the audience feels as though they have a sense of closure when it comes to the story. So you need to think about how will the main problem be resolved in your story? What needs to happen before you can write your conclusion? Think about the theme of your story. Is there a lesson that the character needs to learn? If so, how can you show that they have learned that lesson? What does the character need to accomplish? What actions need to take place? What dialogue needs to be included before you can wrap up the ending and show that your character has either learned their lesson or learned something about themselves or tied into that theme a little bit? What is the heart of your story? So when you're writing the conclusion, so your resolution will be one separate paragraph, 10 to 12 sentences for your resolution. Then you will have your conclusion. Now, before we get into the conclusion, I would like to show you my example of my resolution so that we can come back to this. So let's take a look at my example of the resolution. So this was my main event. We had Beatrix losing her locket, and she left off with Cleo trying to convince her to have faith in herself. So now, into my resolution, I closed my eyes and took a few deep breaths. Grandma always told me that harnessing my gift was about feeling the magic within me. I focused all of my energy on her words. After a few minutes, I began to feel the ground escape from my feet. I opened my eyes and looked down. I was doing it. I was flying. I had never felt anything like this. I felt free. I felt fully and completely like myself. I was born for this. Approaching the top of the clock tower, my locket came into view. Got it! I made my way back down to earth with my locket gripped tightly in the palm of my hand. I'm so proud of you. Cleo gave me the biggest bear hug. Thank you, Cleo. I couldn't have done it without you. We got back into the car and headed back to Elvia just in time to avoid the fresh rainfall. So this is how I have resolved my problem. The solution is to Beatrix losing her locket and it being stuck at the top of the clock tower is that Beatrix is finally able to harness her power by believing in herself and by feeling the magic within her and allowing herself to use her gift of being able to fly. So that is my resolution. Now, as you can see, I've sort of hinted at my lesson that she's learning is a little bit about having faith in yourself, and that goes along with the theme of my story as well. So I'm setting myself up for the conclusion where I will be talking about that. So let's look back at how to write the conclusion. The end or the conclusion should relate to the events in your narrative. The conclusion should explain the solution to the central problem of the story. So this is why I had the resolution and the conclusion going together, because they both sort of explain the solution to the problem. The only difference is that the conclusion is really wrapping everything up and tying up all those loose ends. So I would like you to pause this video at this point and go ahead and watch episode 6 of How to Write an Imaginative Narrative. And this is the closing episode. So go ahead and pause and come back to me when you're ready. All right, so now that you have seen the different types of endings, we're just going to quickly go over them. So we have question endings. Are you going to leave your reader with a question? Are you going to use a circular ending? And what I mean by a circular ending is that your story sort of reflects back on what happened in the beginning, and it sort of comes around full circle. So you had whatever happened in the beginning of your story is now being tied into what's happening at the end, and you can see how it all came around and it was all resolved. So most of us will probably have a circular ending, but it will also go along with the theme or the heart of the story and also a lesson learned. So you don't necessarily have to choose one type of ending because these all do sort of fit together. So if we take a look at the theme or the heart of the story, I said that in my theme or in my story, the theme or the heart of the story was having faith in yourself and pushing yourself to keep trying. That is also part of my lesson learned. Beatrix learns to have faith in herself, and you'll see that in my example conclusion paragraph in just a second. So they do go hand in hand, and I will be tying up any loose ends that I have as well in my conclusion. So now we're at the ending, and I will show you my example. All right, so the next day, I walked into Spellcasting 101 with my head held high and my locket secure around my neck. As I pranced by Celine's desk, I was met with a look of disbelief. She didn't think I had it in me. She was wrong. I have informed Mrs. Winthrop about your recent pranks, and let's just say she wasn't pleased. She has asked to see you after class. I continued to my desk. What do you think will happen? Cleo questioned. Mrs. Winthrop told me that Celine is getting expelled from Elvia. We won't have to deal with her games any longer. I smiled. I couldn't believe that I might actually have Celine to thank for my ability to harness my gift. If it weren't for her evil games, I don't know if I would have ever had enough courage and faith in myself to fly. Sometimes in life, your toughest battles are the most valuable. They teach you how to be strong and fight for yourself when no one else will. Except maybe a good friend like Cleo. So as you can see, I've wrapped up my story. I have tied up my loose ends about what was happening. We now know what happens to Celine. She ends up getting expelled. We know that Cleo and Beatrix will remain close friends. And we have reflected on the beginning of the story. So this ties into the circular ending. She reflects on how originally she wasn't able to harness her gift, but now she has Celine to thank for it, even though Celine was not kind to her in any way. But she's reflecting on the lesson that she's learned, to have courage and faith in herself. Now, we want to avoid cliches when we are writing conclusions. So you don't necessarily want to say, I learned my lesson to always have faith in myself, or I learned to always persevere, because those sentences or those phrases can become quite overdone. So there are ways to express that sentiment by using different phrasing, just like I did here. So I'm referencing what happened in the story to explain how I had courage and faith. So I don't know if I would have ever had enough courage and faith in myself to fly if it weren't for Celine. So I'm getting that point across, that is the theme or the heart of my story, without explicitly saying, I learned this lesson, okay? So today, your task is to write your resolution and your conclusion. Now remember, these should be separate paragraphs. So at this point, you should have a title slide. You should have at least one slide for your introduction, at least one slide for your build-up, at least one slide for your main event, at least one slide for your resolution, and at least one slide for your conclusion. So at this point, you should have 6 slides minimum because one of them is your title. Now again, you may have more than that because if you are doing a comic especially, you may put different paragraphs on different pages, and that is perfectly fine. I would also like to point out, boys and girls, that if you would like to separate, if you are doing a storybook like this and you would like to separate your text onto different pages, you do not have to do it the way I did. You can be creative with it. I put all of my words on one side and I'll be putting my illustrations on the other, but I might decide to go back and cut and paste some of these words over here so that I can put a picture here and a picture here. So I might play around with it in our next session when we do illustrations. So feel free to get creative with the format of your writing on these slides. So don't forget 10 to 12 sentences per paragraph. Try not to ramble on too much. Make it clear and concise so that you keep your reader interested and intrigued, and wrap up all those loose ends, okay? All right, let us know if you have any questions.